The July episode has arrived. This month we have Tom joined by Spiral, a fantastic creative mind of the Shatterpoint community. We talk squad packs, individual characters, the meta at large, and then discuss how you can prepare for it. This episode is accompanied by a variety of format changes for us here at the Slugs. From August, we'll be moving towards releasing one main episode per month, one in real life battle report per month, and also an outside the box episode. Special thanks to Renee Moxie for the super sick title idea, and that will accompany each squad pack released from August onwards. We've also introduced new patron tiers. Check out the episode description for a link where you can see all of them. It does go without saying that at no point will Shatterpoint content be tier locked by the Slugs, and that these tiers are more to support the creative and hobby side of the content that we're releasing, mainly on our YouTube channel. If you like what you're listening to here or what you're seeing on our YouTube channel, please follow, like, and subscribe to our content. It's a fantastic indicator that we're doing the right thing and will allow us to bring you more. A massive thank you goes to our newest patron, Pure Mongrel, and of course to our existing patrons Bonobi, Brendan, Drulvar, Bruno, Death1942, Alan Jones, Winter AU, and Kevin C. It means an incredible amount and we cannot wait to bring you more content. Now, join me as we continue our exciting journey further and further into Star Wars Shatterpoint.
You don't know the power of the
Alright, shut up.
of the dark.
Who's the more foolish, the fool or the fool in politics?
It's a trap!
Kid, I flew from one side of this galaxy to the other and seen a lot of strange stuff, but I've never seen anything to make me believe there's one all-powerful.
G'day everyone, you are listening to Space Slugs. We're coming to you with Tobias, or Desert Spiral from the forums, with a very special episode, which we'd like to frame as a sort of a snapshot of how Shatterpoint is looking as of, late July 2024. So before we dive into it too much, Tobias, thanks so much for joining me once again on the cast. How have you been?
I've been great, and thank you for having me, Tom. It's a pleasure to be here recording with you, and hello to all your wide dearth of audience, I suppose. Hello, folks.
That's one way to describe it, yeah, for sure. So basically what we're doing here is, as I said, we're snapshotting where we think things are, and this is sort of to frame the next series of releases that are going to be done on the Slugs. What we're essentially going to be doing is going forward doing box reviews, but not in the traditional sort of sense. We're not going to be verbatim reading abilities off of cards. There are some fantastic podcasts that do so, which I can link in the description below, such as Hello There. They do a fantastic sort of box by box release. But what we're going to be doing going forward is a thing called Outside the Box. So we wanted to, a snapshot of releases, upon release date. We want to talk about what they do outside of the squad pack that they come in and, how they're going to be influencing the meta at large. But before we want to do that, we don't want to revisit every single release that's happened. But what we do want to do is frame what we think are standouts and then what we think are underrated, but then also provide a really good snapshot of the meta and how you as a player would prepare for that. What do you reckon, Tobias?
I think that sounds excellent, Tom.
Okay, so look, what we'll do is you've been playing more than me. You've probably got a wider range at this stage, and you've been experimenting with some really cool squad building ideas, both in the Premiere and the Showdown formats. We're predominantly sort of playing in the Showdown format at the moment. But that's why I wanted to bring you on the cast. I want your sort of knowledge and your expertise and, of course, your capacity to think outside the box per se. So when we analyze some of these units, I just want to hear how they fit into the meta, if they are a standout, and why they would be a standout. And again, we're not going to be reading abilities necessarily verbatim off a card, but we are going to be talking about why they have the impact that they do. And we're going to sort of try and frame each release, or at least one release per faction. So how about you kick us off with what you think the first of the standout releases would be, Tobias?
Oh, gosh. Okay. I don't know about your whole audience, but I know that I like to enjoy a wide variety of Shatterpoint content. And one of the other podcast recently, Red Mandos did a very interesting take on primaries where they kind of cut everyone into 6 aspects and put a fancy radar chart over the top of it. And I was reflecting on that this morning, and I think that really kind of cuts into this topic quite well because they've put some objective criteria around that. But then I think one of the things that we're trying to do in this outside the box segment is look at the things that are maybe harder to quantify or become a bit more abstract in their application. So I think that will be very interesting sort of as we progress, but thinking about some of those characters where they may look objectively sort of narrow or, dare I say, less powerful than some of the other characters, but they may have sort of nuance or abilities which allow them to do some really amazing things. You know, Hera comes straight to mind. But I think going back to the topic, I don't know if we're going back to Day Dog or if we're just starting from the current wave.
I think we could go from Day Dog, yeah, for sure. And we can sort of lump in the core set alongside Dooku and Obi-Wan Kenobi because they did sort of release on the same day.
Yeah, so I guess from the core set, I think the standout character is probably Maul. And I think that's probably no surprise to anyone, just the versatility that he brings, you know, certainly in an objective sense. And then also when you can start sort of Rube Goldberging his activations to take 2 or 3 points and kill somebody at the same time, I think his tactical application, you know, is more than the sum of his cards, which is significant, you know, at face value as well. So Darth Maul, I think, is probably the standout from the core box set.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you there. The capacity for being force efficient, which is super important in terms of resource management for your strike team, because he can injure himself, of course, instead of spending force points. He has a huge range of movement in terms of force speed, a native advance action, and of course a reposition on 2 on his Sinister Cunning combat stance. Yep. He does Iceless Displacement, which is again free, where it's usually quite expensive. He has melee and ranged attacks, which is again unbelievable. Essentially what I'm trying to say to you is that Lord Maul will do everything for your strike team.
Lord Maul is the quintessential Renaissance man of Shatterpoint.
Absolutely. No, I couldn't agree more.
And the only caveat that I would add to Lord Maul is that in the current meta, sort of cannibalizing your health pool may have diminishing returns, particularly with the ranged damage that Empire in particular is spitting out.
Yeah, and it's very important to note that his revenge attack can only be triggered by melee wounding. So, you know, a lot of that Empire sort of ranged domination will really sort of subvert the caveats that he presents to an opponent. But yeah, you talked about Hello There and the Dooku squad pack.
Yes. Well, I think obviously in Hello There, Obi-Wan is the real prize because poor Cody and the poor 212 have some, let's politely call them limitations. And Obi-Wan's identity is basically framed a ceiling on almost all the galactic releases. I think that would be somewhat fair to say, you know, even if anecdotally. So Obi-Wan's amazing, and he also pairs really well into a sort of range meta because So Uncivilized, you know, whilst it is potential for 3 damage coming back at you, it also puts online his identity. And one of the things that's starting to crop up more is people destroying hunker tokens. So Iden, who's one of the main offenders in the range race, she can do it. Leia can do it. Crosshair and Del Meeko both do it. And so you might be thinking, oh, I'll just get around Obi-Wan Kenobi by blowing off his hunker token. And then suddenly, surprise, it's back. Just in time for your attacks.
No, the hunker synergy that Obi-Wan Kenobi brings to the Galactic Republic is truly off the charts. And, you know, that's due to the identity of knowledge and defense because it just enables some truly fantastic defensive Galactic Republic plays. And I think Obi-Wan Kenobi enables Galactic Republic to play in such a way that you're not necessarily trying to play an attrition game, but you're trying to smother the board with hard to move and sticky supporting secondary and primary units that also have, you know, generally good activations, at least in the secondary and the primary capacity because of all the coordinated fire and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think part of, I guess, the flack that the Republic wears is that their supports are so fragile or flimsy. And then when you pair someone like Obi-Wan with Mace, for instance, you can then mitigate a lot of that, I guess, lack of resilience by sort of getting into the hunker synergies and then the protection or steadfast. And then, like you're saying, their game plan isn't necessarily to kill you, but just to get onto the point first and then make it sort of the burden of flipping it back, prohibitively high for the other player. And
Yeah.
if you can achieve that game plan, then they can be really frustrating to play against. And that's where I guess someone like we're going to talk about in the next squad pack, Django Fett, comes into it, because he can pull people out of those fortified positions without triggering knowledge and defense. So
True, yeah. Diceless displacement is generally a very high caliber of thing to bring to a strike team. I would also just like to say that, I think one of the things that is often not talked about in terms of Obi-Wan's ability to bring to the table, or the pressure that he applies on the table, is he has a fantastic capacity to shut down enemy activations with his combat tree, not necessarily, again, to wound, but to completely neuter. His first few steps on Form 4 Ataru is a shove, a disarm, and an expose. And then if you get further down the tree, which is likely-ish with, your squad mates bringing coordinated fire and, of course, hello there, giving you extra dice,
just
you can give
casual
someone
10 dice.
a disarm, an expose, and a pin, all in 5 successes. And that just can absolutely cripple enemy activations. And, I've been playing Obi-Wan Kenobi alongside General Anakin Skywalker for a long time. And, I really use Anakin to be my hammer, and he'll just get in there and wound something that needs to be wounded. But Obi-Wan and sort of the rest of the strike team will really be sticky and just control activations that will threaten my attrition pieces at large. So I really, special shout out to Obi-Wan's combat tree. I'm not sure if that's really talked about that commonly.
No, and I think you raise a really good point, because in his Ataru side, he can offload all three of the 4 conditions, and then if you have him with, say, Wolfpack, you can drop all 4 conditions on someone and kick them off the point, and that gives them a really bad day. And then if you're pairing it with the Mace squad as well, Mace can do the exact same thing. He has a fairly reliable capacity to drop all 4 conditions on you, even though he's not kicking you off the point. But that, I think, if you can sort of identify the heavy hitters or the hammers in the other team and do that to them, just cripple them down, then you're just really kind of putting the ceiling on what they can achieve in their activations, which probably is where Republic wants to live. So
completely agree. And I think that, Obi-Wan and maybe Hunter, I think you were going to bring up Hunter later on as your pick for Galactic Republic influential squad pack. But, Hunter and Obi sort of compete for who are you going to build your premier strike team around. But we can get to that
absolutely.
in another episode. But yeah, what about Django? He is, certainly an impactful release, quite controversial almost.
Well, I think, Django definitely, and that entire Dooku box, seeing as how we're talking about the holistic package, they're all just incredible pieces in their own right. I mean, Django, yes; Magna Guards, yes; Dooku, yes, and they've all been talked about, by various sort of Shatterpoint pundits, and I don't think we really need to go into them too much, except to say that Django is evergreen and he can fit anywhere. Obviously, within the first timestamp, I can't remember what it is. Fall of the Republic, maybe. But,
I think Fall of the Republic or something similar. I'm not good with the eras, but
no.
Yeah.
So not a Swiftie. So
yeah, took me a while to get that joke, but thank you.
You're welcome. Django is amazing, and I think one of the things which will sort of become a lot more interesting moving forwards is the idea of pairing cross-era characters. Even now, I think you could probably sort of put Django in a scoundrel/bounty hunter team and then pair it with someone like the Mandalorian, who has no sort of crossover into that era, but then you could get quite an interesting sort of sum of your parts, and I think that's going to be very rewarding for squad builders sort of moving forwards. So Django, you might think, he's only Fall of the Republic, but because in your strike team and across your premier team you can sort of have different eras present, I think you can build a lot of sort of cross-era synergy and get some really cool things happening. So
no, completely agree. I love the fact that your eras only need to follow the primary unit that is essentially bringing the squad to the table. So you can do crazy things like bring General Anakin Skywalker alongside Luke, Jedi
Yeah,
Knight Luke Skywalker. You know, the Force is doing some crazy things, and sometimes game designers love to play into that. So yeah, it's a
yeah.
really cool design mechanic, and as more keywords such as scoundrel and spy sort of come into things, then you will see a lot more of that design space open up. But what about Django really makes that sort of box a standout? Is it the capacity for diceless displacement, or is there more to it in your mind?
I think it's well, for Django, it's the whole package. Like it's
Mm,
and in their sort of talk on secondaries, the Hello There podcast did a big love letter to Django recently as well. And I think just kind of mirroring some of what Aman was saying is that he can, reliably sort of move 3 or 4 times. His worst activation again is if you move twice, pull someone off a point, and hunker. That's still pretty good, and you can jump again as well. So you can 1, 2, 3. You can get 3 moves and pull someone off a point at the cost of 2 force without rolling any dice.
yeah,
So it's just that sort of the fallback consistency that he provides with you. As long as you get your angles right in terms of pulling people and don't block your own line of fire, you can make great things happen. And I think he also works really well with multi-level terrain, which is very nice. And sort of one of the great things about Shatterpoint is that sort of 3D element to the landscapes that you fight on. So, and also he's just a cool model. He's got the
very
force
dynamic.
refresh.
Yeah,
Yeah, and even though it doesn't happen a lot, if you get full tree with Django, it can just be
10 damage on a secondary, strong. He would describe himself as a simple man, but we believe that he's the full package. So, what about another Galactic Republic release?
Yeah, I think the Bad Batch box adds a lot of really, really good scope to the Republic, because I think one of the things that we were talking about before we hit record was, that clones and that the Republic supports in general are a little bit underperforming. And I think particularly if you look at things that have come out now, like Rebel Commandos and the ISF and even the ISB, the many of the clones, they don't feel like they were bred for war and spent all of their life training for the sole purpose of conflict. They don't seem to stack up. And Echo and Tech, as a support, I think they add a lot of really cool options to Obi-Wan, who we spoke about before, because they get to sort of gain double benefit out of the hunker token synergy, but then they also help out Anakin, because one of the ways that you can deal with him, and we spoke about this with Obi-Wan, is to just condition stack him into oblivion. And with the forward planning, I think it's called, they can
Mm,
alleviate some of that stress, which is good, because I think when we start to talk about one of those play patterns is sort of crippling the opposition rather than trying to kill them. And I think the rise or the prevalence of revenge style mechanics sometimes steers you into that lane where you do want to cripple people rather than out and out kill them or
definitely.
win them. So forward planning, I think, is great in that capacity. And Crosshair provides the ability to reach out and just touch somebody, and strip hunkers as well. So he's great into the mirror. Wrecker gives a bit more resilience to those around him, particularly clones. And then Hunter is just a bit of a superstar. So I think,
He is. Double attacks, the capacity to ranged and melee, which was lacking quite significantly in Galactic Republic, I believe, outside of Padme
yes,
initially. Yeah.
yeah, the only two Republic primaries, if I recall correctly, who do have a gun. So both of their guns are quite good, and Hunter's definitely more rounded than Padme, because he can mix it up in melee a lot more effectively than she can.
And Hunter's just stand out. I mean, the capacity for him to bring successes to the table or
Yep,
some element of dice fixing just really
yes,
makes clone attacks feel a lot more significant. And when you combine them with other attacks out of activation, even though those subsequent attacks won't benefit from Hunter's identity, they can really start adding up. So if you bring Hunter and Commander Rex or Hunter and Padawan Ahsoka, etc., alongside some of your long range clone supporting units, it can really, really make a difference to their activations. So he's definitely a standout for sure.
yeah, and I think one of the good things about the Bad Batch, and we sort of touched on this with Django, is the tag versatility. Again, they're for the most part scoundrels, so you can combo them out of Republic, and things like forward planning on Echo and Tech aren't tag locked either. So I think they can comfortably kind of slot into a strike team or a premier team as almost a independent package.
Completely agree. That was actually going to be the next thing that I say. Them and Lando and R2D2 in Luke's strike team squad pack. Very, very strong with forward planning. And the fact that it isn't locked to a particular keyword or era or anything, and it's just blanket primary and secondary characters can be, a huge deal.
And I think, like we said, with that kind of crippling game plan, those two characters are, if you're concerned about that, then they're definitely going to help you out. And R2D2 and Lando, particularly because they have a clever disguise, they're somewhat resilient to the range meta as well. They're a Top Gun character, and I think they probably don't get the accolades that they deserve.
All right, so that's the sort of prequel era of things. How about we move into the original trilogy era of things? And I know we won't stand on it too much because we're going to discuss, I think, a lot of these elements in the meta snapshot. But yeah, just some standout squad packs that you think really have influenced the meta.
Obviously, the Iden squad pack, and that's primarily because of Gideon Hask and the ISF. And I think they're, without sounding too melodramatic, off the chain. we spoke about Hunter giving you an element of dice fixing before, or being able to kind of correct your failures, which is great. And Gideon Hask being able to just blanketly provide an additional strike for the majority of your attacks, I think is, in 99% of cases better. Obviously, it's not better in the case where you want to avoid deflect and you can change your one fail into a success. But why I think it's superior to Leader of the Batch is because it lets you exceed your sort of ceiling expectation.
Which is something I think early Shatterpoint players really admired about the game, and that you could look at someone's activation and know exactly what was going to be reached almost.
Yep.
But now it's relatively unwieldy, I would say, facing against the Empire, because you've got your expertise. They're changing results from successes to failures in terms of blocks. They're also adding a whole bunch of extra results, and it's just a lot of stack up.
Yeah, and I don't know if you recall, but when Vader Jedi Hunter came out, one of the things that felt extremely oppressive was his identity allowed people to add 3 additional dice, and that often meant the difference between getting your full tree or not. The typical expectation seems to be that people are developed to reasonably expect 2 to 3 tiles on their combat tree, and then if you add 3 dice, that shifts it to the point where most characters have 4 to 5 tiles, some at 6. But if you can go from 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 with your expectation, that's just gets you into crazy town levels of effectiveness. And when you look at sort of Gideon Hask and say the ISF, when they're using their covert tactics, I think it is, which gives
covert
them
operations, yep.
Yeah, a focus and then sharpshooter, and then you're adding a strike from Gideon Hask. That's really putting you into, that's basically adding Vader dice to your attack.
For no damage, yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely.
and at range, and with the caveat being that there needs to be a scout or another scout character within 5 of the target. And one of the things that kind of rankles me slightly about this is that even it's not another unit, so the ISF gain the benefit of it internally with themselves, and then it doesn't matter if Gideon Hask is wounded, so there's no real ways to sort of overcome it. And if you move up your scout into a good relevant position and they become wounded, then it doesn't matter and you're still getting these dice. That's enough on that soapbox. No,
that's fair enough.
It's a really good box, and if you love the Empire, then you should definitely be using Gideon Hask somewhere in your lists, unless you have a really good plan and a reason not to. And I can't think of what that might be.
No, he's good. He's very good. Honorable mention in that squad pack to Iden as well. I think the fact that she can dash herself multiple times before she even advances, she can expose someone if they don't have a hunker or remove hunker tokens.
Yeah.
And she has 10 or so dice at range 5 with a fantastic expertise tree. I have no problem, I guess, in the game of Shatterpoint with rolling large pools of dice, but previously they were almost completely locked into melee, and there were counterplays you could do to avoid them. But now, the Empire have sort of said, well, we're going to play on our terms, and everyone's got a gun, and they're all rolling 8 to 10 or more dice, and they're adding results. So it can become frustrating is not the right word, but you definitely have to have a very, very, very good plan for it, and that's definitely something that we'll talk about coming up.
Yeah, and I think without sounding whingy, I think like it can be frustrating. It can be frustrating to enter into a game of Shatterpoint and have, particularly if Gideon Hask and Jedi Hunter are on the table, that can be really like demoralizing to just have full tree, full tree, full tree every time you're attacked, and I think that's one of the extrinsic things that you need to kind of have a plan for to deal with, is that how do you keep yourself from going on tilt? And I think that's sort of a little off scope for today, but it's sort of, some of these boxes have a definite psychological, not warfare element to them, but their influence can spread beyond the scope of what's happening on the table to the player, and those things can be tilting or jarring. And I think another good example of that is Mind Trick, where that can tilt people as well. And even if it's not tilting you, if it sort of throws off your mental flow in the middle of a struggle, that can be almost as impactful as wounding one of your characters on the field.
No, I completely agree. I think the psychological impact of just putting those models on the table or seeing them across the table from you, it's significant, and I think you really need to have a plan for those.
Just before we leave this happy chapter, I think the timing of the Iden box was also significant because it happened around the same time that Never Tell Me the Odds was released. And Iden, or the ISF in particular, with their infiltration, are one of the 2 units in game who can deploy on that central offset midline point. I'm not expressing myself very well, but I think we all know what I'm talking about. And also, Iden, with her tactic, she's also one of the few characters that can, on shifting priorities, can seize all of the central points on her first activation. And so those again are sort of come into this kind of tempo or really sort of fast accelerating tempo that put you on the back foot very quickly, and they're backing it up with massive cannons as well. So I think this squad pack is phenomenal, and if you like that very aggressive Cobra Kai style, then this is for you. So
Definitely. And I guess counter to that, at the same time, we had the Real Quiet Like squad pack released with Han Solo, Chewie, and the Rebel Commandos. And I know that it might go against the grain, but I think that this is actually a very, very strong and influential strike team that's been brought to the game, because as we were talking about in terms of tempo, Han and his capacity to keep you in the game with his momentum catch-up mechanics and his ability to move multiple people, including himself, and his ability to condition stack the board whilst shooting at multiple targets is very, very strong. And I think it's a really cool expertise tree that he brings to the table as well in terms of his defenses. So I would say that Han is a very, very strong and influential squad pack. And I think you do need to at least keep him in mind when you're bringing something to an event, because Rebels are going to be there. And I think Han will feature quite heavily, or at least the units or the characters that are brought in the Han box, such as Chewie for his expertise stacking and his bodyguard abilities, or the Rebel Commandos for their capacity to do a very, very large amount of glass cannony style damage. I think that squad pack is fantastic.
I definitely agree with that assessment. I think I just spent the last section talking about the ISF and how great they are, and the Rebel Commandos are, I guess, arguably even better because their active ability dials everything up to 11. They gain the dash, they gain the focus, they gain the hunker. They start with the hunker, so it's hard to alpha strike them in their deployment zone. And then if you have them paired with someone like Hero or Logray, they're comfortably rolling 8 defense dice before they've done anything. So I think Rebel Commandos are an incredible unit, and the biggest downside to them is that you can only feature them once in your Premier Strike team.
Yep.
Like, I agree with you too in terms of Han Solo and Chewbacca. I think Han Solo just needs to be looked at through kind of his own lens. I think there was definitely an element when he released that people felt there was a like a thematic mismatch with him just not being this sort of pistolero, headshotting everybody right out of the gate with his heavy blaster pistol. But I think what they have done with him is really cool, and I really like the way that on his smug scoundrel side, I think the versatility of that tree really kind of speaks to Han Solo as a flying by the seat of his pants kind of guy. And one of the things that I really enjoy is pin strain on the first two tiles, and I think that's a combination that, particularly in this current meta and environment, which favors a lot of out of activation movement, really sets you up in a good place to kind of throttle the surprise factor that's going on, not necessarily around you right now, but what you sort of expect, because you have some knowledge in terms of the command cards. You know what units are yet to activate, and you probably know, if you have an awareness of the game, what effects might influence units before or after they activate as well. And so by sort of pinning and straining things that may not be in a position now but are set to be in a good position, or after the struggle flop could put you into a bad position, I think he's sort of a character that can reward someone with a really good diagnostic of what the game is going to look like in 2 to 3 turns from now, rather than necessarily going for sort of wounds and immediate impact. And I think you see that a lot in his identity as well, with the revenge capacity. A lot of people say, oh, it's useless. He's there are all these ways to shut it down. It's only range 4. There's this, that, and the other, and all of that is true. And yet at the same time, if you position him well, and again, this is somewhere where you can kind of use the levels. Like, if he's on a point but not at the same level as the point, then people are less likely to engage him on the wrong levels. So you can have him in sort of a soft zonal control kind of capacity, where he's sort of at the front, but then if people want to get to the squishy center, they kind of have to step into that revenge bubble. And I think he is someone that will reward a player that puts time and effort and care into sort of unlocking that. But at the same time, he's not as immediately, powerful, quote unquote, as some of the other releases in the same cycle.
Yeah,
But
completely agree with you. I think that the way that you described it in the last episode was Han Solo almost rewards those with a quote unquote prophetic read of the of the development of the game. And I think that is true, knowing your struggle layouts, knowing what is likely to become an active objective, knowing how terrain works, and really sort of conceptualizing the flow of the game will really benefit you as a Han Solo player. And I think that mastering Han Solo as a character will do you very well both in Showdown and Premiere strike teams. And I think these releases have really pushed the meta in an interesting direction, in that shifting priorities, I think, under Rebels is largely back. But that's something that we can touch on, in the next few segments.
I guess one more thing about Han Solo that I really appreciate from a design perspective is that, sort of just throwing back to Padme briefly, she sort of did a similar thing, in that her design kind of breaks fundamental rules of the game, or sort of allows you to circumvent them by, with faith in diplomacy, she can have people on the same point who are wounded contesting. And Han does a similar thing, in that he sort of distorts the fundamentals of the game with his let's keep a little optimism here, by allowing you to kind of keep pace on that momentum tracker as your people are wounded. So he sort of allows you to play differently, or asymmetrically almost, to what your opponent might be doing, in that you can have people be getting wounded, but then you can at the same time not necessarily suffer from that. And then you can also create interesting situations where, if they do try and wound your people, then you can just win a struggle by gaining momentum before the tracker has a chance to shift it at the end of their turn. So
Yeah.
I think that's that's probably one of his most interesting, if not the most interesting abilities, and that's worth consideration and part of why he's a really cool character.
Definitely, yeah. Let's keep a little optimism here is a fantastic ability, and yeah, I think mastering that and when to trigger it, and then all of the other ways that Rebels can generate momentum tokens with some of these new releases can be very, very cool. And I think that mechanic will be something that you're probably going to be referencing in the next squad pack, or the squad pack that you've picked as your standout release for the Rebellion.
Well, if you're talking about making the impossible possible, then you might be right.
Well, that definitely wasn't the first thing that came to mind, but I know that we've got a special place there in this episode to talk about that.
Yep.
But I was indeed talking about your first pick, which was the Stronger Than Fear squad pack. So talk to me about why that's such a standout for you and why that influenced the meta in such a big way.
Wait, that's Kanan, isn't it?
It is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Just so we're on the same track. Yeah, Kanan is an amazing character, and I think everyone is sort of on board with his power, or quote unquote objective power. But then also the things that he can do, that sort of, you see sometimes with a character you see things on their card and you're like, oh yeah, that's cool, that's cool, that's cool. And then when you see it actually unfold on the table, like, it's just wow. He's got some of that Lord Maul sort of Michael Jordan, dynamism and sort of star power. There's a few of the characters in the game that can do just really incredible stuff in and out of their activation, and Kanan is certainly one of them. And not to be forgotten, Ezra is also in that pack, and you've got Zeb carrying the bags. So that's,
yeah, all the action is done by Ezra and
Yeah.
and Kanan, and Zeb has been delegated to the water bottle man. I'd
yeah,
say.
the water boy. So
Yeah.
Zeb is in a sort of semi-unfortunate position where I think as a solo support, without some of the durability shticks that really help supports kind of stay relevant, I think he's kind of like Bowser in Mario Kart. He just falls off really quickly. So yeah, and it's unfortunate, but he is very force hungry, and he's got an okay tree, and he's very durable, I guess. That is his one big asset. But at the end of the day, he is but one man. Or
I've forgotten what the Lazat. That's right.
Lazat, yeah.
Yeah.
And that can only carry you so far when in a game of numbers and board presence, which is unfortunate for him. However, that is the underwhelming part of the box, I guess, whereas Ezra and Kanan are just both off their chops incredible. Yeah, and Ezra, this comes back to that sort of objective, looking at the card stuff. His tree is nice and it's flexible and it does some cool things, but his real power comes in the thanks for doing the heavy lifting, and the ways that can play out on the board, are really, really cool. And having dashes on his defensive tree means that sometimes it's just never safe to attack him, because you could end up losing a point that you thought you had locked down.
Completely agree. And the synergies between Ezra and Kanan, especially because Ezra brings that mandate-like ability with thanks for doing the heavy lifting, is strong. Because you can move Kanan and Ezra at the start of Kanan's activation, and then you can move with a move action to within Ezra's range of 2, and then Ezra gets a jump. So there's just so much capacity for movement and objective stealing there.
Exactly. And I think this is sort of harkening back to the core set. Anyone who spent time with the Mandalorians will have kind of developed that sort of jump a Mandalorian, then move Bo or Gar up, and then get your focus. So they'll be kind of versed in that play pattern of sort of pushing someone up, then moving yourself up, and then getting another effect. So it's kind of nice to see that mechanism reflected in the box. And then I think one of the other cool things about Ezra is that the jump ability just references Force user, so you can pair him in some crazy ways with Lord Maul, like in Rebels, or even Mother Talzin, and sort of still get that action. So, which is pretty cool. I'm not suggesting that Mother Talzin with an Ezra offside would be good. However, moving Savage twice and Ezra once in her activation might not be the worst thing.
A lot of out of activation movement there.
So Ezra is really cool, and then he he kind of plays into that momentum as a sort of actionable resource from rebels as well, because I think this helmet belongs to Ezra Bridger, I think it's called. Gives him an extra momentum for wounding supports.
Yeah.
So that's pretty cool, because then that kind of combos when we get to her with Hera, who likes to spend momentum and can sort of keep you in the race, I guess, as well, like by picking on the low-hanging fruit. 212. So
Or any clone support.
one fashion or another. So
Exactly. So the big one, I guess, from that box is, of course, Kanan, and he has the capacity to jump and heal twice, or heal twice and then jump when an allied Rebel Alliance character is wounded. But then, of course, if they are a Spectre, he also gets to make an attack. But it doesn't have to be at the person that did the wounding. And because he has a beautiful ranged expertise tree and a decent combat melee expertise tree, that ability is just so daunting.
And I think this ability, if you think it's incredible now, wait till Callus hits the deck. And then suddenly with that revenge attack, when he's full treeing people, then it's going to you're going to feel really bad. So
yeah,
because that's one of in the kind of Spectre crew, they're not necessarily very force intensive, and that opens the window for Callus to be doing that, several times per rotation. And I think as long as you don't get greedy, Callus is a force multiplier that Kanan can leverage in sort of magical ways. So
definitely. So that's basically the big standout releases that I think we'd like to touch on, and I've added them down into a list. So if you're a new player, or you're looking for your next purchase, these are essentially what I reckon I could recommend, or we could recommend to you, based on each affiliation per se. I know that that's not really a locked-in thing here in Star Wars Shatterpoint, but it's still giving us a bit of a guideline in terms of what keywords go with what keywords and what characters go with what keywords. So we've got Maul at the beginning. He comes in the core set. He's very neutral. He's sort of that scoundrel, dark-sidey sort of character that you can use anywhere. Brings, again, that force neutrality. He brings that force economy. He's incredibly fast, and he brings diceless displacement. We've got Obi-Wan Kenobi from the Hello There squad pack, and we've got Hunter from the Clone Force 99 squad packs, and they're going to be two primaries that will really amplify the capacity of your clones to do things, both offensively in terms of Hunter and defensively in front of Obi. Yeah, absolutely. They're going to be fantastic in a Premiere format. You've said Django from Twice the Pride is a bit of a standout for the Separatists. And then next up, we've got Iden, Gideon, and essentially the whole box from the Today the Rebellion Dies pack. That's just fantastic if you're looking at playing Empire. It pairs well with everything, including the other primaries.
Or a fine Chianti.
Yep. I've said real quiet, like Han Solo and potentially the Rebel Commandos there are very meta influential, I would say. So if you're looking at expanding your Rebel collection, don't sleep on Han Solo or the Rebel Commandos or that squad pack in general. And then Tobias, of course, recommended Kanan and Ezra from the Stronger Than Fear squad pack. So they're what we would say are very meta defining. So, the next segment would naturally be disappointing releases, or, underutilized releases, I guess you could say. But that's not really something you want to focus on. And Tobias, in fact, wrote in the show notes that he's not sure there are any current and disappointing releases. And I think I'll let you have maybe another few minutes on the soapbox to sort of discuss why you think that is. But you're a player that has looked very intensely and deeply at each Shatterpoint release, and I really admire that. And I think you embody the notion that with enough practice and reps and preparation, almost every Shatterpoint character in the game has a place. So I'll leave it to you just to sort of explain why you've noted that down, and then we can do some honorable mentions or some underrated releases, which I'm quite excited about.
For Shatterpoint, there's the game has come out sort of in waves or phases, and I think if you look at the core set and the fall of the Republic, you can sort of look at that as this is AMG learning to ride the bicycle, and sometimes they fall off, or maybe are too cautious, or didn't push things as far as they might. And I think some of the clones and maybe Cody are good examples of those kind of learning or growing pains where they're sort of, how far can we push this, but then coming, short of the mark in some ways, or not maybe being precisely dialed in. And then when you get into I guess after Cannot Escape, which I think the Vader and Obi-Wan box, I think that's sort of getting into that second phase or the second stage of the life cycle. And at that point, I think they have a fairly decent read on the game, and you see them starting to get more creative and more ambitious with the characters and the abilities and the way things are kind of structured. And so I think everything now is gaining the benefit of the foundations from the initial phase of the game, and probably from their other experiences with like MCP and the other systems that they have. So I think right now the team has a pretty good sort of understanding of the flow and the degree to which they can cook things. And as a result, much less is coming out kind of underbaked. And yes, there will be things which either sort of on paper don't feel as powerful, or they kind of do things in different ways. And an example of that might be looking at Hondo and the Weequay pirates in Guam. But even then, there are ways to probably build into that or find success with them. I mean, at the very least, Weequay pirates are an 8 stamina support, and I know some Republic units would give their
Give their blaster for it.
exactly. And so 8 stamina, sometimes in and of itself is fine, but then you see a lot of the new supports are coming out with 8 as a baseline rather than 7 as a baseline. So, and with climb and with steadfast, and even if it's only steadfast while you're contesting an objective, that's pretty much the time when you want steadfast, is while you are contesting an objective. So, so not having it when you're not in position feels less meaningful anyway. So I guess you can look at Hondo and think, well, these are a bit undercooked, but then I think you can still find things to do with them. And then I guess the other one is maybe some of the Ewok stuff, even though initially they came out and it was the Ewokocalypse.
That's what
now
the Red Mandos called it. Yep.
Yeah, people have cooled down off of that, and sort of the Ewoks. I mean, looking at Longshanks again, have a very kind of disappointing win rate. But I think maybe that again is because people realized that they weren't just going to roll, the entire meta, and then rather than maybe putting in time and dedicating energy into sort of mastering Ewoks, they may have, sort of jump ship or go different directions. So certainly Ewoks, I mean, when we're looking at something like shifting priorities, they're one of the, like a low grade Leah list. I mean, 4 of your, card draws on the first activation will get you the whole midline. So that cannot be ignored, particularly when they're all coming out with hunker tokens and massive defense and potentially steadfast as well. There's room there to kind of grow, but I think generally I feel like AMG has found their stride, and in the current phase of the game, I think most units are kind of hits and there are very few misses right now. So that is the long way for why I think there are no really kind of underwhelming releases right now.
No, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. So let's leave that and go on to the underrated releases. And I wouldn't mind kicking this one off because I know that there was often a lot of chat about Vader 1 being this sort of formidable force. And I understand that the influence that he brings to the strike team that he's paired with is big in that his identity allows you to spike dice in melee. But often he himself was just an attrition piece. And he would do one thing and one thing really well, which was pick a target and wound it. And that's respectable. But if your opponent did that sort of game plan that we discussed earlier in sticking multiple characters from different units on a point, there's often nothing that Vader can do about it other than take one out. That can be a very big blow to your momentum or your pacing, but it can also just sort of be the pillow that you put up to, stop the Vader onslaught. What I don't think is similar here is General Grievous. And I think a lot of people paired General Grievous with Vader 1 initially, instead of looking at Grievous holistically as a powerhouse of a character. He has everything. He really does. I think he's quite slept on as a primary. He has an enormous capacity to move units to get on points, which of course wins games. He's fantastic in both shifting and in sabotage. He has brilliant alpha strike capacity as well, because he's got a range 5 gun. He can double move himself. He's got a large base. But in addition to that, appetite for destruction, which is his ability, innately allows more characters to move and then follow up an attack. So I think if I was going to use hello there sort of tier listing lingo, I would say that my personal opinion of Grievous is that he would be an S tier character. And I think he's often slept on both as a separatist primary, but just as a beat stick and a powerhouse of a unit.
Yeah, I think that's a very good summary of General Grievous. And I think this is something which is, if you listen to the other pundits and their chatter and talk about events and tournaments, you'll hear with surprise that there was no General Grievous at the event. And people wonder why. And I think you sort of touched on it briefly, but there was a period in the game where Vader Jedi Hunter came out, and there was this sort of idea of the strongest pairing in the game was General Grievous and Vader and Fifth Brother and Jango and Obi-Wan and ARF Troopers, I think, or maybe Magnus. But that soon fell out of vogue, and it turned out to be not the boogeyman that it was being made out to be. And I think there might have been an extrinsic factor where General Grievous kind of got caught in the wake of this perception of, oh, you're taking General Grievous, you're trying a bit hard, perhaps. and maybe the community cooled on him. And then also maybe it's because Separatists haven't had any releases since his pack came out, and so people are just kind of a little over them. But I think his package is incredible. And I think he's one of those characters that objectively has a lot of good things going on, and he's tough. He's got good expertise, and he has some tricksy defensive expertise. I think he's probably one of the first characters released with an easy access dash on his defensive expertise. Obviously, Ahsoka and Asajj have jumps on, I think it's 3 or 4, but he's got it on 1 in Cunning Warlord, and he's a great character. He's got a cool gun. He's got a range 5 cannon, and with appetite for destruction, he can maneuver a B2 to fire at the same person, or a B1 as well. So he can kind of really double up on that kind of long range strike. And I think another cool thing about him is that if you activate him, he's got his tactic which lets him move a battle droid, and then if he moves, a Magna Guard can move, and then with appetite for destruction, another droid can move. And in between all that, he can have 2 full advances with Scuttle. So his influence on the whole board can be really, really meaningful, which is like, again, on paper you think, oh yeah, he's got 2 moves and he can move some dudes, but then when you see that happening, that's like, wow, some magic has just happened here. And then at the same time, he's got double shoves, and then if he's attacking with the right droid, he's got more shoves, and then he can pick off low-hanging fruit with his I've been trained in your Jedi arts as well.
Exactly.
So he's one of the few characters that can cause multiple casualties in the same activation, essentially without even rolling dice too, which is pretty cool. And he's got a reposition off one of his attacks, I can't remember where, but if you swing into someone, then reposition into a cluster of other models, and then I've been trained in your Jedi arts, and ping them all for 2 damage, that's not insignificant. So
no, not at all. That's in his Cunning Warlord stance, and it's on 4. He's also got a jump on 3, so
right.
There's a lot that he can do.
So he can cross the board and then go boom, gotcha. So
exactly. And in the meta where we're having infiltrating units like the ISB or the Rebel Commandos, he was already able to alpha strike units that were deployed at the front of their deployment zone.
Yeah.
But now, he's such a great unit to be able to take out those
Hmm.
relatively fragile clone commandos, or at least put a lot of pressure and conditions on them, because he's got on 2 successes with range 5, 4 damage, a shove, and a pin.
Mm.
And then he can likely, depending on how forward your opponent deployed, bring in a B2 to spike dice into them as well. And that's absolutely worth it. And I think
Yep.
he's fantastic. I love him. So look, we'll do one more underrated release. I think this has got a special place in your heart. And I think this is something that you briefly touched on in the last episode that you did with the slugs.
Mm.
So talk to us about Spread a Little Light, which is, I think, maybe your favorite squad pack of all time, if your descriptions online are to be believed. So make the impossible possible.
Make the impossible possible. Yeah, it's got such a great title too. Like, how cool is that? So, no, I really enjoyed this squad pack. I find Hera is an incredible character, and just briefly touching on the rest of it, I haven't actually put Sabine on the table yet, but I think she's really good as well. And then she also pairs really nicely in with Mandalorian and other Rebel options. And then Chopper, I think, is pretty cool as well. And we sort of spoke about Zeb before being a single support model without mandate, but I think where Chopper, I think, pips him out for me, at least, is that he's significantly more durable, and then he also is more mobile and he can't be shot. And I think in the current environment, that can let you hold a point for longer than you have any right to. And so, is that one of ours? I think is a amazing ability, shared by Lando and Bartu. So it must be a droid thing, clearly. But But talking back on Hera, I think she's, yeah, definitely probably one of my favorite characters in the game at the moment. She's one of those characters that people kind of turn their noses up at and poo-poo as being not particularly powerful or strong or objectively, impactful on their turn. And I think that's a mistake. And I think one of my good friends, Jeff, was talking about this the other day, and he said that she has a similar feel to when Luminara was released, and there was a similar sentiment from the community, is that she's not very good. She's does nothing, and the running joke was that she's so slow. How can she ever sort of do anything? But then I think when people start to play her more and appreciate the power of flow of the force, then they garnered a new respect for Luminara. But getting back to Hera, I think it's easy to look at her and think, oh, she does no damage, she's slow, she's this, that, and the other. But then when you think about what she does do, what she does bring to the table, she's got 2 amazing auras. Well, 1 aura, sorry, and 1 pulse. So the cover aura, I think, particularly in the current environment, is amazing. And then if you park up Rebel commanders with her, you get that compounding effect where they can start with 5, 6, 7, 7 dice, and then if they're on their own cover because they have infiltration, then they can be rolling 8 defense dice. They have a reposition on 3, so you run the risk of shooting them and having them reposition onto a forward point, and then quagmiring your ability to influence the game. So
yeah, I think in the way that you described her last episode was that she's really amplifying the ability of you being the rebel player to present unappealing ranged targets to your opponent, or at least targets that have a low chance of getting one shot or influencing your opponent's game plan in a negative way. You can present Lando and R2D2 on one side, which can't be shot unless they're outside of the order deck. And then on the other side, you can present clone commandos with a hunker token, double cover, 8 dice, which is getting almost, in terms of probability, almost guaranteeing that reposition on 3 expertise tokens.
Like, it's also, we were talking about psychology before, but it can be quite confronting when you attack someone and they roll more defense dice than you're rolling attack dice. So,
yeah.
But then getting back to Hera, like that, if you're pairing her with Kanan as well, then you're sort of compounding people's survivability. But then if you do punch through and you do wound people, then then he's just waiting in the wings to punish you for that. And then I think that's what leads into her pulse of the, I can't remember the name, but it's like There's Always Hope or We'll Find Hope, where she can spend a momentum to heal 3 damage and a condition off every friendly rebel within 5. And that's, again, that's something that the impact of that is hard to quantify, because, similar to Luminara, the thing was, oh, well, I'll only just attack one person then. And I think, in a game like Shatterpoint, if you're only ever attacking one person, then you're winning more, or you're possibly not reading the map correctly. And Hera presents a similar situation where, sure, you can only attack one person, or you're free to do that. However, in most cases, the dynamic flow of the game means that you don't have control over when your units activate, so you might be attacking different flanks, particularly on something like Sabotage Showdown, where you have opposite sides of the board to proceed on. So you might find that you are in a position where you must attack multiple things, otherwise you're just going to be edged out of the game.
Yeah.
And that gives her identity a lot more impact, or greater capacity for impact. And because the tactic goes before that, she can try and reel someone back into the aura to heal them for damage and conditions.
No, that's a very good point, actually. Very good point, that the tactic ability happens before the identity, so you're more likely to get the heals, which is
Yeah.
something that innately you look at the card and you think, well, I might not have that many within range 5. Very strong.
And the other thing about the tactic is that it's not range limited either, so it's a global effect, which gives you a lot of capacity to position the board in a way to your liking. And when you couple that with pieces like Ezra, who do have Imperial Mandate, then that gives you the capacity to take ownership of weakly held or back points that your opponent might have felt were safe, or that they had time to reinforce. So Hera activates, she moves somebody, and then in her activation she can advance just like anybody else. And then her cannon, you might not feel that it does a lot of damage. However, I think her value is not necessarily in doing damage. Her expertise tree on both sides is incredible, but the stance that I tend to favor her in is Spread a Little Light. And on that, she can quite easily put out 2 shoves very quickly. And then if she gets to 4 steps, she gets to use her active ability, which is a huge force saving for her. But then she can also pivot into pins and disarms as well. So what we were talking about before with Kenobi, about crippling people so that they have, or so that you're putting a ceiling over the impact that they can sort of project in their activation. So she can do something very similar to that. Plus, she's also got 4 heals relatively early on her chart. So again, that's just compounding her role as a primary healer. That kind of keeps your people away from Death's Door, so that and this is sort of shifting slightly into the meta, I guess, is that one of the ways to deal with the revenge playstyle is to cripple them. So having Hera coming up, heal 1 here, then dash twice, then heal 3 there, and then with her expertise use another heal. So that's 5 pips of healing that is potentially quite far away from each other, because with the heal range 2 and then with 2 dashes thrown in, and then healing 3 and then healing 1 more. So that can give you a lot of coverage to sort of top up your squad. Similar to heals over time, I guess, if you're a WoW player. But then she's also got her active ability, which is just incredible in that We Will Not Stand Down. So very similar in nature to, I think it's Long Live the Empire, but rather than just being able to be applied to a supporting character, she can apply that to primaries and secondaries, and then it doesn't have the caveat of recovering you only if it kills you, so it full heals you and then pulls 1 condition off, and then if you are wounded, it removes that, and then you gain an injured token, and you get to reposition. So in her turn, she can full advance someone with her tactics, she can advance herself, and then she can reposition somebody else. And then if you're in struggle 2 or 3 of the game, that's a good recipe for controlling all 3 points. And then the potential for 2 shoves on her cannon. If you had any point presence already, then you're more than likely to be controlling all of them at the end of her activation. And your team is all topped up, and you've redeployed your cover bubble to where you need it.
Well, that is certainly, yeah. I feel like the way that we described her in the last episode was the first true supporting character
Mm,
that a strike team can bring. And that's really exciting as well to see. And, you know, a lot of the other pundits maybe rated her impact as lower than other primaries, such as Kanan. And it's really interesting to hear as more reps get played, people's opinions of her skyrocket. In fact, one of our patrons, Durulvar, controversially in the Discord, has recently said that he rates Hera as the strongest rebel primary
yeah.
in the game right now, which is, I mean, it's interesting to hear, but it's also really inspiring to hear that someone is getting such an impact out of what would be perceived as a weaker character. So, really good news for Hera and for Shatterpoint.
Like I mentioned before about Padme, how she gets to bend the rules of the game by letting wounded characters contest points, and Hera does something very similar, with We Will Not Stand Down. I think, like I see her role, I mentioned that, she's a holy priest, she's a healer, but she's also this field commander where she's not necessarily doing the heavy lifting or putting wounds on the table. So that's something that someone like Kanan or rebel commandos can do, but she's gravitating your units to positions where they can flip the points and giving you that momentum to create really big swings, in a single activation. And I think that cannot really be understated. But at the same time, on paper, looking at her numbers or her raw abilities, it's easy to miss that sort of on-field application, in a similar way that we spoke about with Grievous.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thanks so much for that. That's been a fantastic breakdown of why you believe Hera would be underrated, and definitely keep your eye on that one. So, essentially, that's framed where we think the squad packs have landed in terms of influencing the meta for one or two for each affiliation there. So that's going to inform our discussions in the future. So what we're essentially going to be doing is those outside the box reviews or podcast discussions, and you can expect one about a week after each product is released. So of course, the next two boxes that are going to be released are the Princess Leia Charming to the Last Death Star pack, the rescue pack, and of course Thrawn that comes with ISB agents and Callus. So look forward to those outside the box reviews, and I think that's going to be something that's very exciting. And of course, that does mean that the Slugs are going to be, adding a few more podcasts to their monthly repertoire, which I'm very excited about, and I hope the audience does enjoy it as well.
I'm so excited to talk about Thrawn and Princess Leia Charmed to the Last.
Oh,
And
cannot wait.
not least of which because I think some of the, like we spoke about cross-era pairings before, well, some of the things you can do with her, I think, are really, really exciting. So.
No, couldn't agree more. And stay tuned about the 9th of August for those to come out. So that's also framed where we think the meta is in terms of what you can likely see on the table. And that's not exclusive. That's just sort of things that we believe are dominating. Dominating is the wrong word. Things that we believe are influencing the meta, as we've sort of repeatedly said. But I do want to give you the platform again, Tobias, to talk about what you think specifically the meta is right now, how you'd be preparing for that at a tournament, and essentially what that means for the average Joe player, all the way up to the competitive player. So I'll hand over to you and just get your thoughts on it, because
Okay.
this is I guess what you can expect to go and play on the kitchen table or play at a tournament with. So it's going to apply to everyone.
Okay. Well, I think there's two layers to this question, and so the first one, in terms of casual play, I think this touches back to what I was saying before about how most of the releases now are fairly well dialed in, and I think you can expect to see anything, and I think you can expect to take anything and feel like you're having a good time and you can influence the game in a meaningful way. And yes, you will, there's the potential to have list mismatches where you might feel that you're being shot off the table with no ability to influence the game, and that's I mean, that happened to me a few weeks ago where I was just, everything felt like a full tree and I was feeling really sad about the game and mopey about my life choices. But I think you just have to take a leaf out of Bluey and you just have to pick yourself up, dust yourself off, have a little cry, and then move on. And yeah, and bad games happen, but good games happen too. So I think if you go in with the right mindset and set your expectations, about what you want to get out of the game, you can have fun with no matter what you're taking. So there's sort of definitely two dominating spheres at the moment, and one of them is this kind of hyper aggressive. At the moment it's sort of ranged aggression, which is being kind of front loaded by pieces like Gideon Hask and the ISF, and then supported by the rest of the Imperial War Machine.
Mm.
And I think part of the fun and the versatility that players find in that is once you have that sort of core, you really can sort of choose the flavor of your own, sort of list with anything from like Vader 2 or Moff Gideon, or even Vader 1 Jedi Hunter, Grand Inquisitor, one of the Swedish Troll was using Iden and Grand Inquisitor for a while, and even the Grand Inquisitor's thrown lightsaber with an additional strike gets work done when he's exposing his target. So
Definitely. I
so
mean, we had Godliness on the cast a few months ago, and he was essentially talking about how the activation that Grand Inquisitor brings to the table can be very good, but it is dice dependent. And Godliness, of course, being world number one Grand Inquisitor player, dice fixing helps, right? Especially with expose.
yeah.
So that's a really interesting and unique way to build Empire, and it
Mm.
works.
Yes, and so there's that with that kind of really just in your face. We're going to basically blow you off the table and cause maximum wounds in as short a space as time. And that's that can be really effective. Like if you are wounded, you cannot contest, in most cases, and there's possibly pins and strains and disarms and shoves and all the other things that go along with getting wounded. So if you're not on points and you're not alive, then it's kind of an easy way to snowball for a very aggressive, high yield kind of list, which Gideon Hask and ISF give you a solid foundation to do that. There are definitely others, I'm sure, but that I think is the thoroughbred in
The
that
creme de
stable.
la creme. Yeah.
Yeah, and then as a sort of reactionary response to that, well, probably back since Jedi Hunter came back, really, or came out, you've got this sort of anti-attrition, anti-aggression globe of invulnerability, which was initially made famous by characters like Dooku and the Magna Guards, and very hard to wound pieces that could turn off successes and crits, and
Mm.
then have revenge triggers thrown out on top of that. So like Dooku, Mother Talzin was the classic pairing.
Yes.
And now the next iteration of that seems to be Kanan plus one. So, Kanan plus the Mandalorian is very common right now in that slot, I guess, if you will. Even though I think Kanan can work very well with other pairings, but the Mandalorian again is sort of on the surface very very good at what he does, and providing a reposition on a wound again lets you secure points or steal points that you might not have been able to.
Especially in conjunction with healing twice and then repositioning. It's very similar to Kanan's heal twice and then jump. Very strong.
Yeah, so that kind of forms the backbone of what might be that sort of revenge or anti-attrition list. And then I think you almost have a Venn diagram, but I think you've got these two spheres, if you can picture it, on the left and the right, and then in the middle you kind of have a sort of a more amorphous kind of shape of everything else. And by that I mean sort of things which aren't necessarily skewing or trying to take a midline approach, or jack of all trades, or maybe a control element. But I think one of the issues is that everything in the middle either loses poorly to the hyper aggression or to the counter control.
Mm.
And I think those two hard skews pulling out to the wings are really defining the meta. And there's a lot of collateral damage kind of in the center. So whether that is just my read on it or if other people are having a similar experience, I'm not sure. But yeah.
Well, look, I'm very excited to be jumping into both the Hello There leagues, which you can do by, signing up to their Patreon and joining their Discord community. It does cost. I think it's in terms of Australian dollars about $8.50 a month. You can also, of course, join the Red Mando leagues, which are free. They usually do a themed sort of league. You can also join the NA league run by Hello There, Zion's Finest, and Dizzard at Rogue One or Rogue Squadron.
Rogue
So there's a
Squadron.
few ways that you can experience this, and I'd like the listener to, jump out there and experience it themselves.
Not least of which is the TTS League, which is being hosted and run by the Space Slugs. So
Yes, currently in the top 8, and we're about to start episode 5 in probably toward the end of August or early September. So thank you for the shout out. Really appreciate it.
my pleasure.
But yeah, so how about we define that middle gray? I know we've defined the attrition-focused Empire style of Squadron, and we've also defined the Revenge Trigger style, with Dooku, Mother Talzin, Kanan, Mando, etc. What would you say would be that middle area that falls out? And I would like to caveat for the listener that Tobias isn't necessarily saying that you will never be able to win an event with a quote unquote gray middle Venn diagram strike team. It would just be that you really need to have an answer for those things potentially in your quote gray strike team. So
I think,
give us an example, Tobias, and maybe we can work from there.
all right. So possibly I think examples which might fit into this might be something like your separatist battle droids or your Ewoks, or even the sort of a Bad Batch Luminara list. Because, well, just from experience, that's one that I enjoy quite a lot. But I think it's not like it has some elements of control, some elements of aggression, and some elements of revenge. So it's sort of an all-round kind of list, and it can do everything to a degree. But when it's sort of paired up into something, which kind of overwhelms it, then it doesn't have the counter tools necessarily to bounce back effectively. So
No, good shot.
and then so in terms of, I guess, Ewoks or droids or sort of lists that necessarily kind of want to take the center line or swarm points, that could just be putting you into range of big cannons which are going to blow you off the table. And you might not have the staying power to consolidate those points, particularly because Iden offers an insane amount of her own maneuverability. So as an example, so I think there's a lot of kind of middle ground or mid-range lists which get swept up in that kind of tug of war, and that's more of a a feeling or a sentiment than backed up by any hard data.
No, but that's very valid in a lot of ways as well, especially coming from a player that does participate in a lot of these sort of online and in real life events. So it's a good thing to hear, but also it frames how we would like to prepare for things in the future. So, we've talked about how you need to plan at least for attrition focused or revenge focused. What do you think that looks like? Off the top of my head, sort of analysis here, I would say that Han might do a good job because he can spread conditions quite heavily and control rather than wound. And that goes into both against revenge triggers and against high yield attrition as well.
Yeah, so I think that's a very good point. And maybe that is, sort of this kind of third blend is a control play style. So if you're putting a ceiling on what the other player can achieve in their activations, then that will intrinsically keep your units a bit more safe. But then also, if you're not wounding characters, then you're not sort of activating the revenge triggers as well. So, so I think Han is probably a good starting point, even though similar to Hera, he is somewhat maligned by the community at large. But I think that's that's potentially just because he's not immediately obvious and requires some effort to to unlock or master. I think one strategy that you could go into is if if you can't beat them, join them, and then have your own aggro list and your own control list, and then play list chicken, in whatever way you need to,
Mm.
or have one of those two camps that you really enjoy. So if you like aggro, have an aggro list, and then have another list that you think could go well into control skew, which could be a mid-range control list. Sorry, when I say control skew, I mean the anti-aggression
Mm.
skew. Um,
So the
so
Kanans, the Mandalorians,
yeah,
etc.
so in some ways, I think it is a rock paper scissors kind of trichotomy, except that rock in this case is the central kind of gray, is sort of harder to define and pin down than have big guns or punish people for having big guns.
No, understood for sure. I do have a question about a potential fourth play style, and this is something that's sort of resurging, and I want to get your opinions on it because we have touched on it a little bit in this episode. The swarm the center style
Mm,
of play in the return to shifting priorities. This isn't something that was necessarily achievable or is achievable in Sabotage Showdown, but shifting priorities is making a resurgence with all these Imperial and Rebel playstyles. So, we're talking about characters such as Endor Leia or Low Grey or Wicket that combined with these new infiltrate units, and this goes for the Empire equivalent as well, can essentially score you 4 on your first turn. And when I say score, of course, I mean claim. And that's an enormous amount of pressure that is placed on your opponent. And I just wonder, do you think that has a style of play in this sort of rock, paper, scissors trichotomy that you're describing? And will that become a really relevant play style? Because consequently, that elevates a lot of things back into the fold, such as Ewoks. They become a serious discussion now because they are fantastic at shifting priorities.
yeah. So, firstly, yes, I do, and secondly, I think if you look at the idea of sort of anti-aggression, or responding to to your opponent's attacks or actions against you, um, some of those lists gain a lot. They can sort of hum along at a reasonable pace, but then when you're attacking them or wounding them, they shift into top gear.
Mm,
So if you're fighting them, I guess asymmetrically, in that you're not kind of activating those speed boosts in their game plan, then you can sort of pursue your own path to victory, which is claiming points, and then kind of keeping them off points, or just swarming and re-swarming points to just gain position on the struggle tracker quickly, in a way that they can't really slow down, because you know most people are just sending one unit up at a time, or they're doing one attack or maybe two attacks. But you're unless you're designed to move a lot of people quickly, you you might find it hard uh, to kind of counter swarm a list that's designed for it, and that's like Ewoks and droids. Um, so in those cases, you might just need to seed struggle 1 and set up for struggle 2, and then make struggle 3 where the game really starts.
mm.
Um, but that gives particularly in shifting priorities, that gives a tremendous advantage to the swarm player, because as we know, picking the third struggle layout can give you a slam dunk to victory.
Big time.
So
Yeah,
um,
absolutely.
which I guess Never Tell Me the Odds has as well. But I think for a swarm player, you probably want to be taking shifting over Never Tell Me the Odds, because you don't want the aggression player to have the capacity to accelerate the struggle tracker back into their territory.
I think that's an excellent point, and that's something that I've seen being debated or discussed online quite a bit in the Discord. I think I just think you've hit the nail on the head. The ability to slow down the struggle tracker for your opponent is huge, and you can even combine little trinkets of revenge triggers or something similar in your rebellion swarm tactics, at least, with Han, which is relatively okay. But then also as Princess Leia comes out, we've seen her card. She does have a revenge trigger as
Yeah.
well. So, there's a lot of capacity to swarm, and another element of that, of course, is preventing control over the struggle tracker, which is what you've just said, and removing the option to give your opponent never tell me the odds is, a great shout there for sure.
Yeah, yeah. The key to half of this is really rebel commandos and ISF, and having sort of multiple options to leverage them means, particularly for rebels, that you can build either with Freedom Fighter Leia into low grey, or you can build Charming to the Last into someone like Han, who has his own movement shenanigans as well. And either of those two choices can lead to you claiming all 4 points off the the drop.
Off the cuff, yeah.
Yeah, but gives you whether you want to do it sort of go full swarm, or if you want to kind of hedge your bets with your backup revenge triggers as well. I think that's that gives you the capacity to play into hyper aggression if you kind of get outfoxed in the list selection phase. But then also similar to Luminara, again, Han Solo has offensive an offensive component to his identity as well. So he does get to dash when things are getting wounded. And whilst it might not be him doing it, because he's more about conditions and sort of self-effects, I guess, rather than raw damage, the Rebel Commandos have an amazing combat tree. And then depending on who your other secondary is, that can help you there as well. So
yeah, big time. Okay, well, look, that's absolutely fantastic. That's sort of where we think, I guess, the meta sits at large. You definitely need to keep an answer in your bag for, that hyper aggro or the counter aggro. Some notable examples would be swarm tactics, or that potentially maybe having, a premier strike team that's built of a counter aggro and a hyper aggro sort of teams yourself. Yes. So as Tobias said before, preparing for a premier today, either have an answer for your local meta or do it harder.
Yeah.
So that's a very valid option as well. So Tobias, thanks so much for joining us on this little framework and snapshot journey, and very excited to have you back on the cast, and of course have you back in the future where we do a lot of these outside the box reviews alongside the sort of main content that we produce here on the Slugs. Was there anything else that you'd like to add in there as a last ditch sort of statement?
No, I think this has been a great episode, and then we've covered some good topics, and thank you for having me back on the show. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, not a problem at all. So where can people find you if they want to pick your brain even harder than I did tonight?
Okay. So the places that I tend to lurk in are the
probably the wrong word.
Frequent. Zion's Finest, they have a Slack, which is a great source of discussion and collaboration on Shatterpoint. And then I think the hive of scum and villainy known as Red Mandos goes without saying and needs no further introduction. It's somewhat infamous now, I think. So
yeah.
But those are the two places that I tend to frequent, and also the Space Lugs Discord as well. So
yeah, of course. Definitely check out all of the things that Tobias has just mentioned. I'll put a link to the Red Mando's Discord, to the Zion Slack, and of course to our own Discord in the episode description. So once again, thanks so much, Tobias. We'll definitely have you on in August for a few episodes when we discuss Thrawn and Leia charming to the last. So you've all been listening to the Space Slugs, and we will leave you until August. And we hope you enjoyed what we brought to the table today.
The ability to destroy a planet is insignificant next to the power of the Force.